Curse of Strahd, Chapter 8, Part 8, The Village of Krezk. This fortified village is a commune on the western side of Barovia. There is no inn here, no stores, no smithy, no tannery, no way to resupply like in other towns in Barovia. The town is, well, communal, where they trade supplies. There are fruit trees growing here. There is an abbey, however, the Abbey of Saint Markovia. Now, if I show you here, this is what the town looks like from above. Here's the old Slavlich Road. The western road here, in this map at least, just goes off into the forests and the mists, although it does technically connect to a small city not far off to the west, but that's in a different land within the domains of Dread. You'll note the road going up to the gates. There's a south gate and I believe a north gate as well. This area right here is a steep hill, and so is this area. It could theoretically be climbed, but it'd be a very difficult climb. And the trail up to the actual abbey itself is incredibly winding and very, very steep. The player characters can't just, most likely, as they have a climb speed, just go straight up like some player characters would probably try to do. They have to, if they are, well, unless they have some special ability, go up the trail the long way, the way it was intended. Notice all the trees, all the scattered houses, and all that. There's not a huge population living in Krezk itself, just the local villagers who are relying on the fruit trees that the town has. And it's notable that they have been out of wine for some time now, as, well, there's been no delivery from the Wizard of Wines. It's the whole thing. Now, as you're going through this particular chapter, again, you do get the backstory of what's happening here, why the town was founded, why the abbey was founded, and a little bit to going on about the abbot, who is the oldest resident, a man who does not age and has been living here for, well, longer than anyone. Many of the villagers believe he is either Strahd in disguise or an agent of Strahd, but in reality, he's neither of those things. The abbot is actually a celestial or an angel who has, by this point, become lawful evil as he is being corrupted by Barovia, amongst other things. Now, you get some details about the road junction, the gatehouse. There is likely a mongrel man or a mongrel folk that the player characters will encounter if they go up the trail to the Abbey of the Sword of Saint Markovia, that is. And the mongrel men, mongrel folk, are the some of the main threats within this adventure. If you think the Isle of Dr. Moreau, that is kind of what the mongrel folk are like. Each one is different, I'll note, or looks different, has some slightly different features. There are some standard stats for them, of course. Now, as you're going into the town, again, here's a description of the town, some information on the villagers and the different things. The town does have a burgomaster. His name is Dmitry Krezkov, and he's descended from the original founders. He's essentially a noble. He's generally a good man who doesn't want any bloodshed, but he's quite distraught as his son, Ilya, the last of his children, died 7 days ago, and he's wishing that he can have his son back, he and his wife. Now, there is a chance that since the abbot is actually an angel, that he might be willing to bring back Ilya through a series of events and things that are going to happen in town. However, being the abbot has swayed towards evil, he won't do it for nothing. He has his own intentions, which are somewhat noble, although quite dark. We'll get to that. There's information on what the people of Krezk actually know about the local area, including the abbot, including the local, well, other locations around Barovia. There is a Pulin shrine here, which is quite important as it has to do with Sergei and Ilyana, and if anyone who drinks from the pool, on the first time at least, they gain the benefit of a Luster Restoration spell, but only the first time. There's also a possibility one of the fortunes, one of the treasures of Ravenloft is found under the gazebo by the pool. Now, the winding road, again, going up to the Abbey, is a place where the player characters might encounter the first mongrel folk individual, Cloven Bellevue. Again, here's his stats. He is not a particularly dangerous threat, but he's got a shovel, and he is, well, actually, I don't think this is Cloven. I think this is Otto. But they look differently. This one particularly has a shovel because he's been doing some grave digging, and they all look different, and they're creepy and weird and hot, not necessarily openly hostile, but they're threatening. And the player characters are probably going to question, what are these disturbing looking individuals who are look like stitched together monsters and humans and animals? There's definitely a theme here. And they are evil aligned, not hideously evil, but they are selfish and greedy and violent. There's another one here that actually do have the picture for Siegfried Bellevue. They're all called the Bellevues. And again, he's one of the mongrel folk. He's got like donkey skin and fur and stuff like that. And he looks a little different than all the others because they all look different. And he and Otto Bellevue, I think this is Otto, are actually the guards at the gate of the Abbey. When player characters get to the gate, they will likely tell the players to go away. I'm sure the player characters won't go away, but then the player characters can deal with them. They're not really a very dangerous, like physical threat, unless the player characters are like first level, but they are, they do have some abilities. They can bite and claw, and they have weapons, and they're more likely to jump away or leap away and hide. Now, as you're going to more of this particular location, this is the ground floor of the Abbey itself. You can see that they encounter Clovis right here on the trail that leads up to the actual Abbey itself, and then this road continues. Eventually, the road exits right here, right at the gate, where they encounter a couple more of them. There's a lot of graves scattered about. One of them is somewhat important, and I believe this is the garden up to the northwest here. Let me get over here. Yeah, that would be their gardens where they help feed. They have to have some food to feed themselves. And it's notable that there's this courtyard, there's these little private chambers here. I think they're locked. And then these are all cells that hold a variety of different mongrel folk who are treated as insane or doing sort of their own weird thing. They're meant to be very different from each other. There's very small doors and probably little windows in the doors, so the player characters can see them and what they're doing, but they're not necessarily a threat at the moment. There is an event later in the adventure that could happen where they're all released, which would make them a threat to the town, although not as violent as you would think. Now, the abbot and also a companion of his, a female flesh golem, are going to be found here in S13. I'll get to them here. There's also the upstairs of this whole location, which again has this little battlement area. It has this upper area where the T is not a trap. I believe it's a teleportation location that brings the player characters there from Castle Ravenloft if they go to that location in Castle Ravenloft. There's a cellar, and there's these other rooms up here, including a large bed chamber. One of these rooms has a bunch of shadows in it that, in case the player characters want to wind around and get in a little extra encounter. And it'll be noted that on the first level, I believe, I think there is actually a flesh golem who is hostile in S15 that will attack the group if the abbot is not currently with them or someone that the flesh golem more or less trusts effectively. Now, there's all these locations. There's a courtyard. There's that, all that. The player characters will have to deal with the mongrel folk they see and what they want to do about those that are imprisoned. There's another one named Mishka Bellevue, and again, they all look different. Mishka's in a well and is chaotic evil and violent, and could be violent because she is chaotic and evil. She's interesting looking. I should say. I guess it's a he. One of those, but they're all very different and they're unusual. They're not openly violently hostile, keep in mind. Most of the other mongrel folk are not even evil, they're chaotic neutral, so they're maybe violent or just odd. There's these tethering posts, there are these little, it's hard to see on this map, but these little chambers right here that are kind of all over the place. I think they're just marked as C. And Yeah, they're chicken sheds. Sorry, well, one of them I believe is I think there's actually is one of the mongrel folk inside one of the sheds where she is kept. He or she is currently kept. And there's these posts where, another mongrel folk is being chained up to. So there's a lot of disturbing things happening here in this particular adventure. And you get descriptions of the different mongrel folk and all that. Now, the more interesting thing about this particular chapter is the abbot himself. Again, he looks human, although very young or young-ish, despite his aura of having being much older. And again, he's actually a diva, but he's corrupted. And although this says he's lawful good, he himself, as an abbot, is actually lawful evil. He's corrupted by Barovia effectively, and he is making flesh golems from corpses. Now, this ties kind of into Frankenstein a little bit, as he's created a flesh golem like a female called Veliska, and here's her stats right here. She essentially is just a flesh golem who is wearing female garments, and he's trying to teach her to talk and more or less to serve as a bride for Strahd. He believes that by turning her into Strahd's new bride, he might be able to break the curse of Barovia, and maybe people can leave, and maybe the sunlight might come back, or Strahd might be able to rest. He's doing the right thing in his own mind, although he is in it for himself. It's very likely maybe he wants to be the Lord of Castle Ravenloft. But now that he's corrupted by Barovia and all that, he's teaching Veliska the finer points of etiquette, and it's possible she is at dance, and she's learning a little bit. She obeys his commands, but she still cannot speak and screams in an unholy manner if forced to try to speak. It's kind of creepy. The other thing is he wants her to be wed to Strahd, so he's seeking a wedding dress, which there is nothing like that in the town of Krezk, but there is one in Vallaki from one of the NPCs in Vallaki. So he is willing, with his abilities, to raise that young child Ilya from the dead, but he'll only do it if his intentions are complete, which is if the player characters bring him a wedding dress that is fitting enough for Veliska so she can marry Strahd. This might seem insane to the player characters or ridiculous. It kind of is. But if the player characters don't do this, events will take place which might get very, very violent in Krezk, unless they don't just kill the abbot and Veliska, which could also happen, especially if your group is kind of a murder hobo group. There are also good possibility there are other treasures hidden here, of course, depending on what you roll for the Taroka deck. The madhouse, this is all the different rooms where most of the mongrel folk are kept. There is this other flesh golem there who is basically just a male flesh golem, most likely, and is just a guardian, and he will attack the player characters if they are not escorted by Cloven Bellevue or the abbot, or there might be someone else, some of the other mongrel folk he might trust. And then these rooms all just have different mongrel folk in them. They're doing different things. They're just fighting with each other, acting weird. And I won't go into each one of them, but some of them are screaming, 16 screaming mongrel folks doing different weird things. And yeah, they ate one of their companions. They're begging for more food. They're very twisted and weird. These ones are singing and dancing. These are mongrel folk babies, which is just very creepy. Yeah, there's a wine cellar. There's wine down there. The abbot's one request is in exchange for one thing he wants a tribute of wine, and there is no wine in town. He has all the wine. He has 33 bottles of purple grape mash number 3 and 24 bottles of red dragon crush from the Wizard of Wines. They're his and all that. There's also this Champagne de l'Estampe, I know I'm pronouncing that wrong, that contains it's empty. It just has a spell scroll of Hero's Feast, although the player characters won't know that. Hidden treasure item. Now, note, here's the image of Cloven. Again, he is very disturbing looking. He is also even. He's evil. He's a mongrel folk. He has literally a parasitic twin of a baby growing off the side of his head who's got scales, and he's got a lobster claw. He's very creepy, and this whole particular chapter is like that. Anyways, you get some stats about how to run him as an NPC. He's less of a hostile, violent threat, more like a creepy threat and a just a really dark, disturbing individual more than anything. Yeah, he's weird. There's the teleportation destination that I noted from Castle Ravenloft. There is the thing on the table, which when the player characters first see it, they'll initially see it as one of the player characters. This is a trick from Strahd, although it's really just a bunch of body parts from the graves being stitched together, an unfinished flesh golem. There are some other things. There's a bunch of shadows up here that are essentially just the remnants of dark souls that perished. Just a little hostile room to add a little combat to what could be just a large role playing scenario. If you want a little bit more combat, you could just cut that. This number 21, if you don't want to just this extra encounter with shadows, you could cut it if your group is much more role playing oriented. It's not necessary to the plot. There's an operating room and some other things like this, a morgue. It's kind of a lot of standard things you would see in an insane asylum or an abbey like this, and some loose treasures. Notably, there's one in a grave that if you go into the graveyard earlier, it's like over here in S7. The only way to actually retrieve the treasure, it's a ring, a magic ring, is actually if an item is brought to this area from Castle Ravenloft. If the player characters, for some reason, go after one particular grave and try to break it open for some reason, thinking there might be a treasure in there for no reason, then they don't find anything. If they just happen to look towards that one grave and break it open and well, nothing's there unless they bring the exact item that they need from Castle Ravenloft, which they have to go to Castle Ravenloft first in that case. Now, lastly, there's some special events here, as many of these ventures have. There is something old, which is the abbot needing the dress, and he's willing to raise Ilya in exchange for that. Again, he's lawful evil. He's not willing to do the right thing for any other reason than his own purposes. In this case, he needs the dress or the equivalent of it from Vallaki. There is something new, which involves the birth of a baby in town, although sadly, the baby has no soul. The baby doesn't cry at all. And the midwife, in this case, tells the player characters that there's no way to give this baby a soul either. There is something borrowed, which is more complicated, but more or less it has to do with retrieving the dress itself, and it deals with the burgomaster. This is actually him right here, and this is his wife. I guess both in armor, effectively, and retrieving that dress and some other minor things that have to do with this, and going on the quest to retrieve it from Vallaki. Note that they will not leave the town unless they're heavily armed, because the townsfolk of Krezk are terrified of the nearby werewolves that live in a cave to the northeast of town. It's not that far away. So most of the people never leave the town, effectively. And then lastly, something blue. And this is more the conclusion to Irina. I think I called her Ilya. Irina Kolyana's storyline. If the player characters bring her all the way to Krezk instead of leaving her in Vallaki, she will likely reach the edge of the pool where she'll see, well, Sergei, Strahd's brother, who will call her by her name Tatiana and will ask her to come into the waters with her, and she will try to do that. Now, the player characters might see this as madness, and they might pull her out, which will prevent this from happening. But in reality, she will be safe in some maybe demi-plane with Sergei. Who knows? It's left kind of vague. But if this does happen, Strahd will be aware of it and be very angry. You'll see his visage appear in clouds high above, and he will strike lightning down on the pool, destroying its magic and potentially trying to kill anyone there. And that is Strahd being very, very angry if the player characters successfully get Irina to this location, and then she more or less hides from Strahd this way. Now, overall, this particular adventure I'd say is a 4 out of 5 compared to some of the other adventures, mostly because there is. Before I note that, by the way, one of the events here has to do with the mongrel folk being let loose and being sent into the village to hunt for supplies and take a bunch of food from the villagers who will then maybe starve. That's one of the other events here, connected to this at least. But as I said, this adventure is about a 4 out of 5. It's dependent on a lot of events happening. in order for the main conflict to actually happen. Which honestly, the main conflict that could happen here is an event later on involving the mongrel men or mongrel folk being let loose onto the town and causing violence. This is the most chaotic event that could happen. Player characters are likely just to show up and find that most of the mongrel folk are just in their cells and are not that big of a threat. Now, this could be interesting. It might be interesting if the player characters come here the first time and find them more or less confined, but maybe the second time they come here, the mongrel folk are loose and raiding the town and things are happening. Again, that's an event. The DM could just have that event happen as the player characters are arriving at the town itself, which could prove much more interesting when it comes to different things. But as a result, the adventure might not come across at this chapter as a full adventure. It might seem kind of weak, with being that the abbot is not an outright violent hostile threat. There are some enemies the player characters can fight in this particular adventure, but it's not a black and white situation. It's kind of gray, and it could be very interesting as to what exactly happens. And it might be a challenge for some DMs to run this entire adventure based on the events and the morally gray situation happening here. It is a very interesting adventure and different than a standard D&D adventure as a result. Now, guys, if you like these videos and you want to see more of them, please like this video, subscribe for more content, follow my Patreon if you can, and stay tuned for more videos.